Really hard to record a podcast when you don't actually record.
Right?
You might want to do your own backup just in case this totally fails.
Unless I screw up really bad.
You'll be all right. I think you'll be fine. All right, let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. This week's audiobook recommendation is from today's guest, Sera Tajima, Hacking Growth, How Today's Fastest Growing Companies Drive Breakout Success by Sean Ellis and Morgan Brown. Hacking Growth is a guide that reveals the strategies used by fast-growing companies for success. It emphasizes data-driven approaches, iterative experimentation, and scalable growth engines. The book provides valuable insights for achieving sustainable growth and outperforming competitors. Through real-life case studies, Ellis and Morgan offer practical lessons on optimizing customer acquisition and retention and fostering a culture of continuous innovation within the organization. Hacking Growth serves as a roadmap for businesses seeking breakout success in dynamic market landscapes. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to start your free trial and download Hacking Growth completely free and help support the show in the process. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode, and if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So if you've been on LinkedIn for any amount of time, I'm sure you've come across Sera. Sera is the founder and the principal designer of The Craft, a design consultancy and education company that empowers aspiring designers to develop influential and transformative products. Her expertise encompasses product design strategy, UX research, growth, sustainability, workshops, future visioning, and processes. She combines design, data, and emotion to deliver exceptional user experiences that drive innovation and impact. Sera's design approach is sustainable and ethical, contributing to several companies' growth objectives. And if you're looking for a dedicated design partner who can help you achieve your business goals while creating a better world, then you should connect with Sera. Sera, welcome to the show. It is so nice to have you here. How's it going?
Hey, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for that lovely intro. I'm really excited to be here. I've listened to a few of your episodes.
Right on.
I know I sent you like a DM on LinkedIn one time. You said something funny.
Did I?
That stood out to me. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
I can't remember at this point what it was. I think it was like a dad joke.
That's what I do. Yeah, I do those.
So right on point.
I've actually, what's funny, somewhere up here on my library, I don't know where it is, but I have a book of dad jokes. I feel like it's like, I have 2 kids, so I feel like I got to know the dad jokes, It's like, you know the normal ones, but there's some really funny ones in there. I'll dig it out. Maybe I'll throw it in somewhere in the episode today.
That's fun. Oh yeah. Send me like jokes that I can use. But
they're really good.
Yeah, it was really funny. And then this morning I listened to you and Jeff talking about UX design.
Oh, right on. Oh, that was
why UX versus
UI.
Yeah.
Right on. That was my very first interview actually for Beyond UX. So that was really exciting.
No way.
Yeah, Jeff will always be my first. He'll always be my first. So I'm really excited to have you on today, Sera. One of the things that I'm really excited to talk to you about today is you have got such a varied background. Your experience kind of crosses over all of these various different subsets of the creative industry, startups and big enterprises, big companies, small companies. You got your own thing now. Before we start getting into that, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get into UX design and how did you get to where you are today?
So it's funny. I'm home in Hawaii now, where I'm originally from, and I came across some drawing that I did as a kid where I had a picture of myself and it said like, world's best designer or something.
Oh, wow.
And I've always been quite artistic and interested in, being creative. And I wanted to go to college for that, actually. And I don't know if you've heard this term, tiger mom.
Tiger mom.
But
I don't.
That is my mom. So she was like, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, and that's about it. And so I ended up not being able to go to college for anything artistic. I ended up doing political science at UC Berkeley.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And in a very roundabout way, came back to design after working in tech originally as an instructional designer for developers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was quite a journey, but I'm actually very happy that I studied other things.
I tell you what, there is something to that. There is something to that sort of roundabout way to UX starting out.
Yeah.
Not to say there's anything wrong with people who go straight from high school or whatever into that design field. If you know that you want to do that, that's great. But,
Right.
My background is very similar, well, not similar, but very similar in that it was a roundabout way. But I started out at economics and actually realized like the only job I'd ever get would be either, working at a bank or selling insurance or something. And, I was like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. But that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, how did you get into UX design specifically?
What I did at Zendesk and the company prior, which was a startup, is create content for people to learn how to use the product. So at Zendesk, they had this apps marketplace, and it would be, courses on how to develop basically on our apps marketplace and how to, use our APIs, how to code, all of that fun stuff. And so it was much more focused on web development, I would say, coding.
Oh, wow. Okay. Right on.
Yeah.
So how did you get into UX then? Did you teach yourself? Did you take a course? Did you take a boot camp? Did you do a boot camp? How did you end up getting into UX design?
Yes, I did a boot camp. And so basically from, first getting my foot in the door in tech as, someone who was more focused on web development, I realized that product design existed. And that was my first interaction really with a product designer or product design team. And I was like, oh, that actually seems way more me than, doing web development,
Yeah.
And so from there, I was like, I took a few months, actually. I kind of struggled with the decision, and looking back, it's really silly, but I was like, do I want to be a designer? Because I just had this complex now about it not being a respected career.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I ended up thinking, you know what? Like it aligns with everything that I'm good at, naturally, everything that I'm interested in. And so I decided to go for it. And I signed up for a UX bootcamp with Springboard. I was in their first cohort ever for their UX design.
Okay.
So it's funny because I found this out later, but I was the fastest person to ever finish their boot camp, which, at that point was the first cohort.
Do you still hold that record?
I went to a talk. They have, an annual Springboard Rise talk, and the guy chased me down and was like, hey, you're that girl. And I was like, what girl? And then he explained to me that I had finished the fastest and that they still talk about me. And I was like, oh, sweet. That's awesome, But as I went through the course, I remember hitting points where they would be like, go do this thing. And it hadn't been created yet because I moved through the course so quickly.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's all self-paced, I assume.
Self-paced, yeah. So they'd be like, go post in the Slack channel. And then the Slack channel didn't exist yet.
So you're like, hello. There's crickets. Yeah. Where's all the people? That's really fascinating. Well, what was your experience like being the first cohort? I imagine there were probably some growing pains, I would assume. Like you mentioned that they didn't have some of this stuff ready yet.
For sure. Yeah. I think it didn't deter me too much because I was very self-directed and I, was really on this mission of, okay, I want to be done with this in a few months and I want to get a job offer right away. So I, went in guns blazing, and if I couldn't find what I needed, I just went off myself and Googled it, right? And I think that's a very important attitude to have when taking a boot camp because you don't always know if it's, for example, an instructional designer, they don't have real experience working in the industry. So you don't know if they've given you the best resources even. And so for me, going off and doing your own research is really important.
Well, I think, it's interesting because I'm actually self-taught. I never did take a course. I mentioned going to school for economics and stuff. And
yeah, how did that transition happen?
Well, I dropped out of school actually. So what's funny if I learned anything from economics, it was the concept of a sunk cost fallacy. And
right,
why would I finish this stupid degree if I'm never going to use it? So yeah. I'm like, I learned something. I'm out. I'm done. I never got the piece of paper that said I finished it, but I just dropped out, and I did design. I guess. Well, at the time I didn't think of myself as a designer, to be honest.
Right.
But I was doing freelance web design and stuff for my bands and my friends' bands and things like that. And that was when I dropped out of school and I was just waiting tables. I was like, well, I'll freelance for a little while, and it wasn't UX necessarily. It was more graphic design.
Yeah.
Things like that. But yeah, that's how I eventually got into it. But, but this isn't about me. This is about you. Nobody's we're here to talk about you. But yeah, so I'm just joking, but that's how I ended up getting into it. Yeah. But what's funny is, I was just thinking there's sort of this mentality, I think, of certain successful types, regardless of what field you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always the ones who tend to be the most successful regardless of if it's web development, design, engineering, doctor, lawyer, whatever, they're the ones who want to go out and do it and don't wait for somebody to show them exactly how they figure it out.
Yeah.
And so it's no surprise to me that you've been rather successful with that transition and you were the first one. I'm actually not surprised at all to hear that. So
yeah, I mean, I might have been annoying, but yeah, I was really self-directed. And I remember, so at Springboard, you get paired with a mentor, and my mentor is currently the VP of design at Zendesk.
Wow, okay.
So he has a lot of experience, right? Like years of experience. I remember him just laughing at me in one coaching session and basically telling me to chill out.
Really? Oh, that's so funny.
Because I was like, yeah, I was like, the recruiters, like, they're not getting back to me quick enough and like, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, you need to relax. Like, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly that, because I do a lot of mentoring as well. And I get some people like that are just like, where are the people? They're not getting back. You're moving so fast.
Yeah.
And they just don't. Nobody else does,
Right.
Especially these recruiters who probably have like a million different people to reach out to every day. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about today was your varied experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've done stuff at a lot of different companies and you've had a lot of experience working at some of these different places in different cultures, different teams, different org structures and things like that. So tell me a little bit about the various teams that you've been on and talk a little bit about some of those cultures if you can.
Yeah. Where to start? So basically the first company that I worked with ever after Springboard started as an internship, and then they liked my work. So they kept me on as a contractor while I was interviewing. And that was like a Y Combinator startup that I worked with very much in like the early phases of getting the company going. And so they were still figuring out like, what does the product look like? What are the capabilities? And there I spent a lot of time conducting UX research. And it was actually really fun because I got to go drive. I was in California at the time in the Bay Area. I actually got to go drive to the client. It was like a compliance tool. And I interviewed everyone there and like got to see what they were doing. And it was really hands-on and really fun. But there, as you can imagine, was a lot of ambiguity at that point, right? And as a completely new product designer, I don't think I really knew what I was getting into, but I just, figured it out as I went, basically.
Were you the only designer there?
I was, yeah.
You were the sole designer?
I was the first designer. I met directly with the CEO of the company, and he kind of explained the vision to me. But, as you probably know, with a lot of these startups, they don't have a background in design.
Right.
And so sometimes the perception, right, is that design is just the UI.
Yep. And
they don't realize that there's all this, especially as a product designer, like you're thinking about the business strategy, you're thinking about the customers, you're thinking about, how many people have this challenge? Is this something we should prioritize? And so there's a whole lot that goes into that process. And I think they really enjoyed having a designer, actually.
I know every startup's different, so caveat that, right? So your experience certainly wouldn't be exactly the same as somebody else. But I worked as the sole designer at a little startup agency, actually. We did apps for other people, so it was cool because it was a lot of other little projects every few months. But I'm curious, I had a certain experience, but I'm curious what your experience was like as a sole designer. And, maybe speak to that if you could and think about that through, the audience here obviously is like, junior designers or people that are looking to do a career shift that might be exploring options at various places.
Yeah.
What was that sole designer, lone wolf kind of designer gig like for you?
Well, I really enjoyed it, but I tend to be very self-directed. And so, I think it depends on who the person is, really knowing, which size company you should go for. Generally, so I've been a solo designer in different capacities. It's been early on in my career that I had that position. And then I, more recently shifted into contracting where I'm a solo designer often. And I think for people who are really just entering the industry for the first time, I would recommend going to a company with at least one other designer so that you actually have someone to learn from. Right. I do think that's really important in the beginning. So a lot of designers coming into the industry will focus on, I want to work at a FANG company. I want to work at Netflix or Facebook or Google or, some company that has that brand name recognition. And it's like, well, actually, are you going to learn the most? Because early on in your career, what's most important is actually learning, right? And growth, like rapid growth. And when you go to larger companies, you have a very specific role. It's very outlined. There's a little bit more bureaucracy at bigger companies. Everything moves a little slower, right? Especially if it's public. And so it's kind of like, well, there is value to going to a startup because you're probably going to be doing a lot more. You might be in charge of a lot more. Even as a new designer, you might be able to lead an entire feature or an entire part of the product. And you're going to be working with really talented people as well at startups.
Yeah, that's funny. It's interesting you mentioned that about being able to do multiple things. One of my experience as the sort of lone wolf designer at that early startup was very similar to that, and it was the first UX job that I had, and I got really lucky, I think, in that they hired me without really understanding what a UX person actually did. But I feel like for a long time, I don't know, maybe it took like a year or two, a couple of years, where we actually hired our first designer. But I had like a bad case, like Dunning-Kruger effect, I think. Like I thought I knew way more than I actually did.
Oh, interesting.
And one of the things I was going to ask you is, when you were there as the lone wolf designer, this was sort of your first UX job, right?
Yeah.
Am I wrong? Yeah. How did you figure out some of those things you're talking about, having to learn from maybe somebody else? How did you go about learning that on your own? Did you stumble a lot? Did you fail a lot? How did you know you were failing? What was that like learning as you kind of went?
Yeah, well, at that point, I have to say there was definitely some internal panic going on that I did not show to anyone that I was working with, right? Because I went in and, it was directly with the CEO, and he was like drawing things on a whiteboard, like, here's what I'm thinking. And it was, very much not from the lens of a design perspective or a designer, of course. Yeah. And they did, market research, very much focused on the business perspective. And, it's not that those are mutually exclusive, but coming from the training I had, I was like, how do I take this in order to proceed? Because I think when you have a design education, you learn design thinking, right? So you know how to go from like UX research all the way to delivery and implementation. But the gaps there coming from a boot camp are really, how do I take an ambiguous thing that might not even be a problem yet and figure out what is the problem and what is the right problem? Like, I can't just take what they're saying. I have to actually observe them. I have to observe multiple people. I have to observe them using the product and really like take that ambiguity and turn it into, this is the problem we want to focus on. And as well, like figuring out how you're going to measure that success, right, is also something that's lacking in a boot camp. So I think that initial stage for me, figuring out how do I even turn this into UX research, was a bit of a challenge. But I just kind of leaned back on the whole design thinking process once we got started.
It's funny because like for me, like being completely self-taught, I read books and at the time, this was like, I got my first UX job 2011. So this was like, before boot camps were really a thing, very few courses at schools and things like that. Apple was just starting to do their nice looking designs and stuff. And iOS was barely, a couple of years old at that point. Google hadn't even come up with material yet. This was well before that. So there was a lot of stuff. I
didn't realize that.
Yeah. So this was long time ago for me. God, it's like weird saying that. But there was a lot of resources and stuff that were probably available that I don't think I even knew about. And so, kind of like, it's sort of one of those things like, you don't know what you don't know. And exactly. I just always thought like, oh, I'm the best. I'm not the best. I'm like, oh, I'm so good. I know what I'm doing. And it wasn't until I think we hired some other folks. And then, ultimately later I went and got a job in another place, and I realized like, oh my God. Yeah. I had no idea what I was doing this entire time. But yeah, it's sort of one of those things that's kind of fascinating. Your experience though, coming from the boot camp where you had these foundational things and you were trying to, it sounds like, kind of leverage those two things or figure out how to balance those two things. People really being focused on business and you knowing you're supposed to focus on users, and how do I reconcile these two things?
Right. Yeah. When you go into a company that has no design knowledge and no designers, then it really becomes up to the designer to create the design culture almost. And so you at that point become an educator. And for me, it was like, well, I'm not ready to educate other people about design because this is my first role ever. And so it was really interesting trying to like balance, voicing, being the voice of the customer, but also voicing this design perspective and still like holding space for them and the knowledge that they had.
Yeah, it's funny because I talk to a lot of people that kind of weigh this sort of like decision. Like, do I go to a startup and I'm the only designer? Do I go to a big company with a big team where I can learn some stuff? And what are the pros and cons? And it's just like you're mentioning, one of the things I could tell people a lot is like, look, if you go to this solo design role, one, you're on your own, you're doing all the design work. But just like you said, your job is to lead the team and build that maturity, build that UX maturity up.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that's like completely unrelated to design. right? It's all about leadership skills. It's about influence,
Yeah.
about storytelling, and all these other things. That's kind of, I love that you brought that up, because one of the things that I like to tell people is, if you're considering this, like, keep in mind, you're going to be doing a lot more than design at these smaller companies, right? So it sounds like that was your experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's even been my experience at larger companies. So, like, the first
Yeah,
role I
that's true.
had
Yeah.
was really focused on growth design, and it was at this company called Hired, which is a tech job marketplace. And so there, I realized for the first time how much you're interacting with other people constantly, right? 24/7. You have to learn how to communicate with people, how to, regularly update stakeholders, how to manage different perspectives and bring balance to that, and how to still push forth, like, the needs of the customer in addition to the needs of the business. You're presenting your work all the time. And so I think that first job for me was, I had many different moments of realization or aha moments where I was like, oh, I didn't think that I would be doing this as a designer. A lot of people think they're going to be, working on the UI the entire time.
Yeah. So that was your experience with startups. Tell me a little bit more about, like, working in some of these larger companies. I know that you worked at Webflow, right?
Yes.
A little bit. Is that technically a large company? I know everybody knows the name, but is it actually a large company, or is it just a few people?
I would say it's a mid-sized company,
Like a
right?
mid-sized company? Okay.
It's not a massive company yet, not as big as Zendesk, but it's
Sure.
getting,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
growing, really
Yeah.
steadily.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, everybody knows Webflow now. What was that like working for this larger company? We'll say at least larger, obviously larger than a startup. What was that like, coming from a little tiny startup where I assume everything's kind of more nimble, right, to coming to a bigger company with more bureaucracy, larger teams, more people involved?
Yeah.
How was that for you? What was that like?
So it's interesting. I think, it depends what team you're on, actually, for what experience you have at a company, and not even necessarily, like, certainly that plays a role, but the size doesn't necessarily determine for every company you go to what the experience will be. Because for me, when I joined Webflow, they had created an entirely new team for us. And so
Wow.
the
Okay.
team was really focused on the Webflow ecosystem and the marketplace that they have, which at the time didn't exist. It was just all these, like, disparate assets and templates and whatnot that you could find in different places of their website. So this team was formed and tasked with, creating this really unified ecosystem. And as a designer, you can almost think of it like Figma's community, where
Sure.
you,
Yeah.
can interact with all these people, and you can get the templates, and you can interact and comment and, duplicate and like and whatnot. So that's essentially what we were creating. And because the team was so new, it was a really new challenge for me, because I wasn't the only one coming on and onboarding. Everyone was coming together
Yeah.
and just,
Right. Right.
determining the knowledge, determining how to move forward, and also working with each other for the first time. So that in itself was a really unique challenge. Whereas other things in Webflow, of course, they already existed and they were more established. We were very new.
It almost, to me, sounds like a mini startup inside of a larger company, almost, like, where
Yeah.
you've got this team coming together, they're storming,
Yeah.
right, and eventually norming, performing, but you're kind of going through the phases of this new team building, and
Yeah.
trying to figure out processes, a completely new market that, like, didn't exist inside this company. Were you able to kind of take some of your knowledge from the startup world and apply it there to be successful?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think, as you get more senior, you are more outspoken about, your designs or design process in general. And so you are more comfortable holding your own weight or holding your ground when it comes to certain decisions that should be made and how to move forward. Right? When you're just entering the industry, you don't really know exactly how to move forward with, different problems, different processes. And so with that ambiguity, I was a lot more comfortable in being like, hey, so what are the concerns here? Tell me so that I can identify this as I move forward, really working with stakeholders in that manner, instead of just being led by everyone else, because everyone was so new.
Now, I know when you were at Zendesk, this was before you became a product designer and you were, instructional design. But what was that like? If you can compare all these experiences, because you've sort of run the gamut,
Yes.
startup, mid-size, large size. I don't know, any interesting takeaways from the three? Maybe, I mean, I'm sure there's pros and cons, benefits to each, but I don't know. Tell me a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So Zendesk is a public company. So that
I
was
didn't know that.
very
Okay.
different from any other company I've worked at, because they're very established. They, have very clear departments, organizations, teams, processes, planning, everything is, to a T. And when I worked there, I didn't need to deal with so much ambiguity. Whereas, at the startup, of course, there was some ambiguity. And then working at an entirely new team on Webflow, it was all ambiguous. And we needed to define, what we were doing and what the goals were. I came into Zendesk really knowing like, this is what I've been hired for. And so that's sort of what I mean when I talk about if you go to a larger company, you're going to have a very defined role with very specific intended outcomes. And I would say they're even more of a stickler at larger companies about, not just measuring the project success, but also looking at you as an employee and how you are helping the company succeed.
So you took like all this knowledge, and I assume at some point you were like, screw this, I'm going to start my own thing. And you started your own company. And was the craft your kind of first foray into being an entrepreneur, or did you have some like little test runs along the way that kind of maybe failed that didn't end up in your LinkedIn profile? But what was that like? I'm curious, that transition to business owner.
Yes, the craft is the first company that I created. Yeah. So this was a slow burn. It started as a side hustle while I was working at Webflow. And so as a side hustle, I was doing coaching and registered the business, of course. And then from there, it turned into, hearing all these kind of young designers talk about their struggles, learning design, getting into the field, and even with boot camps, just some struggles that they had with boot camps, with mentors and whatnot. And I basically identified, a market opportunity to help people get into this industry and to learn design. And so from there, it turned into creating an intro course. And at that point, I had quit my job at Webflow and went all in on the business. And then the intro course was really a test for creating the bootcamp. So I made a lot of mistakes with the intro course that I did not repeat when I created the bootcamp.
I'm curious because, as somebody who has a side hustle, obviously this podcast, I got a full-time job. This is, I don't make any money off of this.
Yeah.
But I'm curious though, like what was that leak? It must have been somewhat terrifying jumping into the full-time business owner.
You know what? I knew for several years that I wanted to own my own business. In a way, to me, it was lifting the glass ceiling on potential opportunities and also just your own ability to dictate your path, right? If you work for a company, the company is always going to be the one in charge of determining where you go and even when you can up level and when you can take on new tasks. And so for me, I was really like, let's rip this Band-Aid off. I'm not risk averse at all. And so I just dove in. It's fair to say that having worked in tech for a few years, I saved enough money that should an emergency happen, I would be fine, right? If I wasn't making money, I had planned for that. So I was prepared to not make money for 3 to 6 months when I launched the business. And initially it started as contracting. And so what I didn't expect was when I quit, I immediately got requests for contracting. And then I worked with a really great client for 3 months. And that set me up to bootstrap the company.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So you had that sort of ability to just flex and just be ready and adaptability. Maybe that's the word I'm thinking of. I love to see that.
I actually was really happy with doing consulting. I enjoy continuing to work as a product designer and not only focus on, creating this ed tech company. I do think it's important if I'm teaching other people that I continue to work myself.
That's really true. That's a good point. Because that's sort of one of the complaints that I've heard from people in taking boot camps often is that the instructors aren't doing full-time work. And so how can this...
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard that.
Well, I've heard a few people, not a lot of people, maybe some of the more thoughtful people that are just questioning the critical thinkers. Like, how can you tell me what to do if you aren't actually doing this work?
Right.
So, that's kind of something that I appreciate, is doing the work so that you're still learning. And, that's kind of one of the things a lot of people complain about academics, right? Like, how can you teach me how to do this if you haven't done it in 20 years? Like some of these tenured professor in law or medicine or something. So having somebody who's actively doing it, to me, that's maybe something to look out for when you're looking into a boot camp.
Oh, yeah.
I talked with Megan Thomas not long ago, and one of the things that she made a really great point is, find the boot camp, but figure out who your instructors are going to be.
Right.
Because, you could have a really terrible instructor at a great boot camp and learn nothing. Mm-hmm. You could have a really good instructor at an otherwise terrible boot camp and learn a ton.
Yes.
So figure out if you mesh with this person, if you like them, just anything really, but do your homework before you write a check and sign a bunch of money.
Yeah.
So when you think about some of that startup work, I imagine that probably helped quite a bit with your own startup.
Yes.
Kind of being in that environment. Yeah.
Everything helped, honestly. We didn't really talk about this, but, prior to transitioning, because I did political science, I did law after. And so even having that experience in law helps me now with writing my own contracts. I don't need to hire someone. I just do it myself. And I'm very comfortable with that, right? Like submitting contracts to clients or submitting contracts to our coaches or students. So
back when I used to do freelance, I had a buddy I went to high school with who was a lawyer, and I would get him to do all my contracts and stuff, and it wasn't cheap. I can tell you that. I probably spent a ton of money. So that's actually really fascinating, though. You've got such a broad background, I guess would be the right word, broad base of knowledge to build upon.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to necessarily rely on a lot of these people. You think about like the T-shaped designer, right? Like somebody who can go broad, who has like, a couple of very, very specific things they're really good at, but then can also go broad. It's interesting to think about, like, people think of T-shaped designers, I guess, and they think of all the things having to do with the design. But there's other things, especially like a T-shaped business owner, maybe is a better way to put it, where you've got this sort of like experience across.
Yeah, the deep knowledge is design.
Absolutely. So I love that. So let me ask you this, a little bit of like somebody coming out, so again, audience here, junior designers, maybe career transitioners, people who are looking to get in design. If you had to sort of, compare and contrast the three benefits, positives and benefits of the various, entities that you've been involved with, can you speak to that a little bit and maybe help give some advice? Like, what should they expect? Who would be a good fit for these various roles, pros and cons, things like that?
For people starting out, I really recommend going to startups because I think you just learn so much more. You advance quicker. And for a lot of young people, that is pretty important to them. It might not be so rational, but I can relate to, just getting into my first product design role and being like, I want to be a senior now, And so having that, constantly building on your milestones. And if you go to a smaller startup, I think the chances you're going to be able to have a larger impact at that small company are much higher. Whereas if you're going to a large company, I think the impact you will have is going to be very specific and very narrow. In addition to that, I would recommend going to a company that has at least one designer, but if possible, a team of really talented designers, right? Like the number one thing you should optimize for is your growth path. And the second thing I would say is who you're going to work with is going to be really, really important to determine that growth path. Because if you're working with other people that, are not as skilled, then you're not going to be able to learn as much as you possibly could.
I think back to my experience and how I got to be where I am today. It took me a little while to figure out, like, I didn't know what I was doing because I was the only designer and that was my first UX job. And if I could go back in time and give myself advice,
yes,
it would probably be find a place, just like you said, a startup with at least one or two people that actually knew what they were doing that could teach me. I think about this analogy all the time of a gymnast, or someone wanting to learn to do a backflip.
Right.
You could go online, you could go on YouTube, you could watch, backflip videos all day long, and you can go in your backyard and you can try to do a backflip, and you might do a backflip. You might also break your neck, So if you can go, though, to a gym and find someone who's actually knows how to do a backflip, they go, oh, your hand's right here. You got to do this. You got to, and maybe have some safety equipment or the big pool full of cushions or something you can jump into. You're going to learn how to do a backflip correctly much quicker.
Yes.
And, it's kind of one of those things like, yes, going and learning on your own, you'll absolutely get there, but it's going to be a lot of trial and error and you're going to fail a lot. And if you can find somebody who knows what they're doing, they can teach you how to do it the right way the first time, and you can avoid those sort of failure moments.
Right. And that really comes back to what you were saying about you don't know what you don't know, right? Is if you can have someone to tell you specifically what you don't know, you're going to get there so much quicker. I also think people underestimate what they can learn from their peers. A lot of people are very focused on someone at a very high position at a very well-known tech company and trying to get this person to be their mentor. And actually, you're going to learn a lot just at your first job from your peers, right? From other designers that you're working with, but also product managers and working with engineers. And
great point.
It's up to you as the designer to take that relationship to a deeper level, right? Not just, okay, so the company said I'm going to have one-on-ones with these people. It's like, no, if you really want to learn about growth marketing or something and how that impacts your role, or you want to learn about what the engineer's doing, then go talk to them and like get yourself involved, because no one's going to do it for you. You have to take control of your career.
Yeah, I love that you point that out. And you just said something too I want to call out is, meeting with the product managers, meeting with the engineers. This is probably like the one complaint that I would have with UX education in general, whether it's a boot camp or, a full-time 4-year course.
Yes.
Or even just teaching yourself reading a book. The real world of design involves dealing with those people.
Yeah.
In every possible scenario, unless you were the only person working on the app, building the app, designing the app, managing the app, releasing the app, all that stuff,
right,
which is somewhat unlikely.
Yeah.
You're going to deal with those people. And that's kind of something like I think a lot of people never really understand until they actually get that first job. Those relationships with those other people are just so important,
right.
And what I've seen, not all the time, but there's certain designers that come out of school, with this sort of like, and not that you did this, but in your example, you had all this knowledge about how things should work in the back of your head, right?
Theory, right?
Yeah, theory. And then you go and apply it, right? And there's certain designers out there that just fight and fight and fight and fight because this isn't how I learned it. This isn't what we should be doing. You're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And they push back and they end up, not burning bridges, not even building the bridges to begin with, putting up walls essentially, when they should be building a bridge to cross the river, they're putting up a wall.
Right.
And that's kind of something that I on these, smaller team, larger team, doesn't matter. 1 or 2 developers, it doesn't matter. These are things that you'll learn. And it's something, I know we're not talking about education necessarily, but that's something I feel like is just so important. Getting out there, just like you said, scheduling it yourself. Nobody's going to do it for you.
Exactly. So important. And don't feel like you can't take the initiative yourself just because that wasn't part of your onboarding plan, But I love what you said there, because that was something that I struggled with so much after my boot camp is, well, first of all, struggling to get the final job offer because I had never presented my work before. And so I had no idea how to present my portfolio. I didn't know. I needed to figure out how to do storytelling, how to, talk about how I would measure success and all of that. But the second thing was in the interview process, I really struggled with a question that every single person asks, which is, how do you work with product managers and how do you work with engineers, right? Top 2 questions, right, that everyone is going to ask you in the interview, not necessarily from other designers, but from those people that you're interviewing with to talk about that relationship. And of course, when you have no experience, you can't talk about it. But I think there are ways to work around that, which I had learned and which I teach. So one thing that we teach in our bootcamp is actually we have product managers come in and engineers come in and talk about, the work that they do and how they work with designers and, what does that relationship look like and what makes a strong designer, what makes that relationship strong. And so these are things that I've baked into our curriculum.
I love that. How do you guys do that? Is it like a guest lecture type of thing, a QA, or is it?
Bit of both, I would say. It's like a panel. So we determine the questions beforehand, but we also like to kind of let it go organically where it goes, if people feel like it's important to talk about something that we've missed. And at the end, we save time for questions.
I love that. Yeah, because that's something like most people never get.
Never.
They never get that, especially the bigger ones that I know of, at least. Like, that's never something that anybody actually ever talks about. So I love you guys are doing that. When you think about the various things you've been in, there's a lot of people have, preconceived ideas of what these various roles will look like at various size companies. Have you ever come across any of these things where you heard some of these things and they were just totally wrong? Some misconceptions about small, medium, large, owning your own business even, that you think is worth sharing?
I think the biggest misconception for people just trying to get into the industry for the first time is that it's going to be all about the UI, right? Like, social media is so distorted when it comes to that. And, all the SEO terms that will pop up are like UI, UX, digital design, really focusing content on just that visual aspect. And so I've reviewed some bootcamp portfolios too of people coming out from various bootcamps, and it really seems like there's this lack of depth around the process and the why, and really understanding like why you're doing something in the first place and connecting the dots, right? Because each step is not independent of the previous one. Each step is dependent on the previous one. And so I think, entering the industry, the most common misconception is that it's about making things pretty, which is, the common thing that we all hear, but it's it's so true that there is this perception of, oh, designers make things pretty. And I've seen the same even in tech companies from, maybe a product manager who's more technical, who's never worked with design before.
I can't tell you, even in, the larger companies, small companies, it doesn't matter how many times I've heard, we're not ready for the UX yet.
Yeah.
Like right now, that would be the perfect time to bring in UX is when you're not ready for the wireframes. Please, like right now, let's do it now.
Right.
But yeah, even large, small, it doesn't matter where. I just had that conversation with somebody. I heard them say that, God, I don't even know. Like this was like 2 months ago, and it's funny because like my role, I'm an experienced architect. So like I don't do the wireframes.
Yeah.
So like I have a product designer and we have interaction designers that they do that, and I wouldn't even say their job is to make it pretty. Their job is to make it usable and functional, but to design the screen and figure it out, And I'm like, guys, like my job is literally to help you right now. So like, send me the goddamn invite, So it's just a lot of pushback. It's insane how often you hear that.
Right.
It blows my mind. 2023.
Yeah.
And it's funny because software is not new. And yeah, Agile's relatively new since the 90s maybe, But like even still, it's like people have been doing this so long.
Right.
Like everybody says how UX is so new. It's not that new. Like it's been around for decades.
It's
like
been around.
I feel like at this point, this is something we shouldn't be dealing with, but it just blows my mind. I don't understand it. I don't know. It's definitely frustrating. It's funny. There's a lot of people that I follow on LinkedIn, like, Dr. Nick Fine and all these other people. They're more UX researchers and stuff like that, but they just complain about this thing like all the time. And I don't know. It blows my mind that we're still 2023. Here we are.
Right. Yeah.
Dealing with it. I don't know. I don't get it.
I don't know if you saw one of my recent posts on LinkedIn about, people commenting on a YouTube video I did about product design in 2023. And people were like, that's not product design. Like, take this title down.
It's like insane for me, a product designer, like a physical product designer, industrial designer who's designing a physical product. They call themselves product designers.
Yeah.
But for us, we're designing a digital product. Like, what you have to call yourself like a physical product designer or like a tangible product designer versus they're both things people use.
Right.
They're both products that we sell. A company makes money off of it, whether it's digital or physical. Two very different jobs, obviously. A physical designer doing 3D animate or 3D CAD designs and stuff make a physical thing, but it's still a product.
Right.
It's still something I'm buying and selling and
physical
using
or digital
in some way.
Product. So it's like, ultimately it's like, why do you care so much? Why do you feel like you need to control what other people are doing? That is the industry standard, It's not like it was something that we created ourselves. So
people are ridiculous when it comes to so a lot of misconceptions. Anything else like from like those big companies, small companies? Was anything you expected going into that bigger company when you got a job at Zendesk? Again, you were doing a different kind of role in product design, but was there something you expected? Like you expected more bureaucracy than there was, or you expected this or that or something?
I don't think I expected bureaucracy. So I think I learned that there were a lot more guardrails than I expected. You couldn't really step outside of the role that was defined for you. Whereas at a startup, at least in my experience, the ones that I've worked with, I could very much go as far as I wanted to in terms of like who I wanted to collaborate with, work with, come up with my own ideas. So, of course, having started my own business, I enjoy being independent and I enjoy kind of, thinking outside of the box, I would say, and going for it. And I thought I could do that a little bit more at startup. So again, depends. Like I hate giving blanket advice. I think it really, you need to know who you are as a person and what's going to work for you.
That's a great thing to call out, by the way. The caveat there is like, this is one person's experience at one specific company.
Right.
Other large companies with somebody else could have a completely different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I often get this sort of like question when I was doing ADP lists. I've since stopped doing it, but I would get this question all the time. Should I get a job at a startup or a big company?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's sort of one of those things like blanket advice warning. This is something like I just like to tell people. Did you ever wait tables? Did you ever bartend or wait tables or work in the service?
I was a hostess, got yelled at and everything.
Okay. Yeah. So I feel like this is sort of one of those things like I feel like everyone should wait tables for a few years because it makes you appreciate everything else, And I think the same goes with like a startup, It's very fast paced. It's in agency work too when I worked in advertising agencies. It's fast, it's short deadlines, quick turnaround times, very stressful, a lot of times late nights. And when you're young and you don't have kids or a family, to me, that's like the perfect time to experience that.
I agree.
So that later, when you get a job at a big company and there's a work-life balance, you appreciate
Yes.
it, and you appreciate what you have. Like I work at a giant corporation right now, GE Aerospace, right? And we've got a lot of young designers that will complain. And I'm like, what are you complaining about? You have no idea how good you've got it. Yes, there's some bullshit we got to pull it up with, but Jesus Christ, go get a job at this startup and work all night and sleep under your desk and then come back and tell me that this is
they could go to Twitter. No, I'm kidding. So
yeah, exactly.
On that
well, not anymore.
Though, right. I think like what you called out is really important, which is like, it's very easy to go from company to company and say, oh, this company wasn't good because of this, and this company wasn't good because of this. And it's like, ultimately, no company is going to be perfect. So, coming into the industry or coming into any industry, you should know that from the jump and understand that every company is going to have problems, right? Like a perfect company doesn't exist. It's a concept. And so it's more about understanding yourself and what you value in a company, right? Which is what you touched on. Like once you're a parent, you don't want to work after 6 p.m. or even 5 maybe. Like you want to be able
4 p.m. You kidding me? 4 p.m. I'm done.
Okay, sorry. Correction. 4 p.m. Well, and you want to go home to your...
But I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky where I work. Yeah.
Right. So it's like understanding these things about yourself, like what's important to you going into the role and what can you tolerate? Because every company is going to have problems, and it's about, does that align basically with your own interests and values, or has it crossed a boundary that you're not willing to deal with?
I think that's a really great call out. That's definitely something to think about. So we've had you for a little while. We're almost like up at an hour at this point. Anything else that you have that you think is worth calling out that we haven't really touched on? Junior designers, transitioners, getting into any of these fields, any last bits of advice that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
I know that some people are interested in contracting or eventually starting their own business. So maybe that's something we could talk about a little bit more, is how to make that transition.
Yeah, please do. You have any insights, any thoughts?
Yeah. So, a question I get pretty frequently is how to get into contracting. And I did a talk recently at like Uber has this new apprenticeship program that they're doing to help designers enter the industry, really focused on diversity and inclusion. So it's
awesome.
Really cool. But a lot of people had questions around kind of starting your own thing. And I think that is a very Gen Z kind of interest now, is like, well, if I don't want to work for a company, how do I go on my own route? I do think there's value early on in getting experience by working for companies. So initially, I would always recommend that you work first for a few companies and get some experience under your belt, work with some really talented people, and learn about how different companies operate, right? That's going to be really critical in moving forward successfully with your own venture, whether that is contracting or whether that is starting your own business.
Yeah, I can't agree with that enough. Learning from somebody, hands-on experience, and then taking that, and again, I don't know, I'm like 41 right now, so I'm like, might be just like a, crotchety old man, just like complaining about stuff. But I see like so many young kids that just like want it now.
Yeah.
And it's like, I get it,
right.
You want it, but like learn from somebody else.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, sometimes you need other people. Like I get
exactly.
it. I get you want your, do your own thing, but
yeah.
I don't know. I'm showing my age. I'm like a geriatric millennial, I think, but
I completely agree with that. I can relate because that is me. I, came in guns blazing and was like, why is this taking so long? So I absolutely had that challenge myself of learning to be patient and take the time to learn. And ultimately, you have to kind of question, like, why am I so pressed to move up so quickly, Because when you think about it, I had this realization my first year because I was like, ooh, I'd like to be a senior in about 1 year. And then I was sort of like, well, if I become a senior in 1 year, then what happens after that? And then I'm basically done with my career and I'm only 10 years in or something.
CEO by 30.
Right, yeah.
Sure.
And bam, I'm here now. But anyways,
I think you retire. That's what you do. You make $1 million and you retire.
Yeah, you could, right? Or just do passion projects. But yeah, I think there is something to learning to be patient and, having patience as my own weak point. I can say that there is really value in taking time with your career, trying things and figuring out what it is that you enjoy and what kind of life you want to live as well. I think so many people choose a career thinking, oh, I want to do this, but not thinking what the implications are for their own life.
I interviewed Debbie Levitt a couple weeks back, and one of the things that we talked about was that critical thinking, and it applies to so much. Part of it is, thinking about the sources that you read. Part of it is getting information and advice and thinking critically about that. But part of it is also thinking critically about your life and what job do you want and why do you want that job?
Yeah.
Why that company? Why that role? Why that team? Why that manager?
Right.
What are you going to learn and how is it going to help you, like thinking like a chess game, a couple steps ahead.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you mentioned you're this person who kind of wanted everything and it took you a little while to figure that out. How did you get there? Did something happen? Did it click? Did you do something? Did you actively try? Did something happen in your life that made you realize like this wasn't right? What happened and how did you change that mentality?
Oof. How much longer do we have?
I got time. You got a hard stop in a little bit.
Well, you know what? I think it's been like a lifelong journey, but that's like the easy cop-out answer. And so I think it was really in that first year on the job where I was like, I really love what I do. And I don't see any reason why I should be pressed to rush this just to get a different title, because ultimately I would be kind of cheating myself out of just being a junior product designer, right? Like you have to take time in these different levels to really kind of build up that skill set, right? If you think about a career ladder, there's no reason why I should be immediately jumping to a senior. And then I really did think like, well, what comes next then? If I'm trying to jump through all these hoops so quickly, like I'll be done with my career in a few years, So It's just not really practical. I think the other thing for me about building my own business was really wanting to have that kind of creative control over how I run things and over that journey in general and how I live my life. I'm, kind of a nomad. I move a lot, just kind of moving around to different countries and whatnot. And that was one of the reasons why I decided not to do law, because as a lawyer, right, you need to live in basically the same state for the rest of your life.
Yeah, you got to get certified, I would assume, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I grew up in Louisiana, and we have like special laws down there. We have like Napoleonic code, so you have to go to law school in Louisiana to teach law to practice law in Louisiana because the code is
crazy.
So different. We have that Napoleonic code, which is based on Napoleon and French law and things like that. So anyway, yeah, that's a great point. I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're what you were just talking about with realizing that like it takes time, you got to be in a certain place. I actually have a guest coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm interviewing him about followership, right? And everybody's familiar with leadership, obviously, but like with leadership comes followership. You can't lead nobody, right? You have to have followers to lead.
Right.
And so this idea of being a great follower, part of it, I think is, I guess I'll find out more when I interview him, but part of it is, being happy with where you are and not always trying to be in charge.
Right.
Not always trying to move up, not always trying to be the senior or the leader or the person at the top, but taking that in. Not to say you can never be that, but, being okay with that role and being comfortable with that role for some amount of time because you're getting something out of it.
Exactly.
Like you said, you're kind of learning. It's like, I'm going to be junior for a little while before I try to go rush and be a senior before I'm ready.
Yeah.
Because you're not setting yourself up for success. Right? You're setting yourself up for a lot of, Dunning-Kruger effect, essentially, where you think you know more than you might actually know. So I love that you pointed that out. I think that's a really great thing for junior folks, people coming into this field. It's so complex. There's so many nuances. There's so many things you could learn and paths and jobs and tasks and things to do. Take your time.
Enjoy the journey, right?
Enjoy the journey.
We're not enjoying the journey. What is it all for anyways? I mean,
I love it.
A lot of people wait their entire career to, have someone else give them permission or give them a title that they think is all of a sudden going to fulfill them. And, now I'm successful. But really success is internal, right? It's like that feeling of I'm happy right now where I am. I've decided to be happy with this and I'm going to enjoy it instead of constantly striving, right? And that doesn't mean that you stop striving, but you just take it all in stride and appreciate the journey.
One of the things that it sounds like learning and going and doing all these things, you had a lot of failures.
Yeah.
Not a lot of failures. I hate to say it that way, but everybody does, whatever, we'll face it. Everybody stumbles. Maybe we'll call them stumbling blocks.
Yeah.
I don't know. Stumbles. When you think about maybe like an attribute that some of these junior designers might need to try to learn a little bit to get to that next level, what do you think that attribute would be?
Well, I guess the first word that comes to mind is grit. But I also think in our society, I think a lot of people in tech understand this, but I think as a society, we need to redefine the word failure because failure sounds very harsh and very definite, right? But
it does.
ultimately,
I just did it a second ago, and I was like, "Tell me about your failures." Like, wait, no, and I caught myself like, "Oh, well, not that, not failures. That sounds terrible." But no, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, you have to fall down to get up, right? So I think, thinking about the growth path for your career and your life in general, it's not going to be linear, right? It's going to be, kind of like this spiky graph where you're going down and going up. And in order to go up, you need to really sit in your failures and understand why you failed in order to move forward successfully, right? So I actually think people should be really grateful for their failures because it's teaching you, right?
Yeah.
Every single failure is teaching you how to redirect yourself in order to be successful. It's maybe teaching you something about yourself, even about how you operate, or, maybe you reached a point where you thought that meant success to you. And ultimately, when you got there, you realized you were really unhappy. So I think every failure is like a teacher sort of that we can be grateful for and learn how to redirect ourselves. So coming out of failure is not anything to be like shameful about, right? It's like, oh no,
Absolutely.
I stood up. Every time you get knocked down, you keep standing up, right? And that's ultimately what makes success.
Yeah, and it's funny because I mentioned the thing about waiting tables and working in an agency and stuff before, and it makes you appreciate though the success.
Yeah,
I think more when you failed a little bit. And let's imagine a world where you've never failed and you've only ever succeeded every single time.
Right.
There's a certain mindset that comes along with assuming you're always going to be perfect. And, there's, I don't know. I don't know what you might call that. I'm sure like the Germans probably have a word for it, but like there's, I don't know what you might call that, but I don't know. Entitlement. Yeah. You're just like feeling entitled. Like you should always succeed. You should always have this because, well, I can't fail. So, I think it makes you appreciate that thing when you get it, that success, whatever it looks like to you.
Yeah.
It's hard to appreciate that if you've never failed.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, Sera, this has been an awesome conversation. I love it. Before we get out of here, I've got a few questions that I like to ask all my guests to help all those Beyond UX listeners get to know my guests a little bit better. Do you have some time to stick around for a couple questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Right on. All right. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Oh, I saw this one on the list. I do really bad with favorites, but I am a book nerd.
Top 3.
I have been since I was a kid. I'm just going to turn around and look at my bookshelf for ideas. Okay, well, I have to say, as a kid, probably growing up, the favorite non-design book, right, was like the Harry Potter series.
Okay, yeah.
And I heard they're coming out with like a whole new like movie series for that.
Are they rebooting it or are they like sequels?
I think
so. Like new, like
an entirely new,
like reboot, not like oh wow, that's weird. Okay,
yeah,
that's so weird. Okay, yeah. I didn't know that. I had no idea.
They have to make it now for the young people.
Yeah, I guess you got to get the young kids hooked, right?
Right.
Yeah, eventually you're going to end up doing with like Super Mario where, all the parents who like had kids that like they read all these books when they were kids can take their older kids now to the movies and be like, "Oh, I remember that from when I was I don't know if did you watch I don't know if you're big on Super Mario Brothers or Nintendo or anything like that.
I think I played it when I was a kid. I used to do gaming more.
Okay. So when you say you were a kid, I feel like I'm going to date myself here, but back when I was a kid, I had like the original Nintendo, right? Back in the 90s, okay? And it had these cartridges, right? And they would never work. Like you stick them in and you just good luck if the thing would turn on. You get the flashing black and white screen on the old NES. Anyway, we went to go watch the Mario Brothers movie, the Super Mario World and Super Mario Brothers movie recently. And they had this scene where they're walking through and they're in the Toad Village and they have an antique shop. And it's like, it says antiques. And when you hear one of the characters go, "Oh, this thing is really cool. Does it work?" And the guy goes, "Oh yeah, you just got to blow in it." And it's so funny because like when we were kids, that's how you just would have to get the NES, you have to blow into the cartridge. And it's just so funny because it was like the antique shop now and all these old like adults like, "Oh, that wasn't as a kid. Thanks a lot."
That's
anyway,
so
really
funny.
That just reminds me of the Harry Potter thing. All right.
Yeah. I used to play, I don't know if you remember Game Boy.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. I used to play Game Boy a lot. Yeah. And like Age of Empires.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Age of Empires was one of my favorites on the Windows.
Yeah. I would always look up like cheat codes to get more gold.
I love Age of Empires. Yeah. You can actually download that for free now, like completely free and play it. Yeah. So anyway, it's like, it's been so long. I don't know if it's like out of like the copyright's expired.
Right.
Such an old game. Anyway. All right. So Harry Potter. That's your favorite.
So I'm thinking, the second one that comes to mind is the Nike book. And I think there's a movie out for that right now.
The Nike book. I'm not familiar.
Yeah, Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, he has this book about, his entire journey to building this like massive empire, right? And it was just really real. Like I really enjoyed it. He talks about, starting from nothing, like as we mentioned, like some failures that ultimately helped him succeed, right? How he hired people, like his family life, how it impacted his family life and all of that. So I do remember, even though it was a while ago, really enjoying that book. And then I'm reading this book now, actually, which I could show you. It's called Let My People Go Surfing. And it's the founder of Patagonia. And so this book really appeals to me.
Is it like an autobiography? Or?
Yeah, it's like the story of how he founded Patagonia. And Patagonia is this company that we all recognize as really kind of at the forefront of like ethical, sustainable business, right?
Sure.
And so he didn't really like at any point kind of sell out to, I just want to make a ton of money with this business. And that's something that really resonates with me because I'm really building my own business on values. And there's not, I don't want to say there's not too many examples for that, but Patagonia is a really strong example of someone that stayed true to their kind of founder story and their values throughout that journey.
Yeah. And didn't he just recently like do something? He did something. What did he do recently?
Oh, I don't know.
He like donated the company to like something, or like he donated the shares, or I don't know.
Oh, I haven't read that.
Anyway, I cut that out. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't Patagonia. Maybe that was another company altogether. But
they do have the 1% for the planet, where like all these companies donate 1% of their profits, and that's something that I've been looking into.
Right on. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot, but over time it adds up.
Yeah.
So I love that. That's cool. All right, what is your favorite non-design podcast?
Oh man. Can I look?
Sure, yeah.
Am I allowed to check my phone?
Phone a friend, yeah.
Non-design podcast. Man, this was tough. Okay. I should have prepared answers to this. Okay, there's a podcast I've been really into lately, which is Huberman Lab. And that is...
You are like the third person that has mentioned Huberman Lab.
Oh, no
and I
way.
still have not checked it out.
Not
yeah.
Damn it.
I mean, it's very popular, apparently. It's popular with designers, I guess. But no, it's... go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
I've just been really interested in neuroscience lately, and also kind of like quantum physics and, things along those lines, because about 7 months ago now, I caught COVID for the second time, but it turned really bad. Like it turned into long COVID, and I had neurological issues.
Wow.
So it's just been this journey of like tweaking like how I live, basically how I eat, how I sleep, like, resting in the middle of the day, and just really trying to optimize my health. And so Huberman Lab has actually helped me a lot with that, because he has all these little hacks that he talks about.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So you're like, like I said, you're like the third person that's suggested that. I need to just go and listen to it, because it sounds fascinating. I love that kind of stuff too. Like I generally don't listen to design podcasts. I usually listen to like stuff like that, or like history podcasts. So that's the kind of stuff I like. I totally, I eat up. All right. Speaking of eating, what is your favorite meal?
Favorite meal.
And this could be something you've cooked. It could be something you've bought. It could be something your grandma used to make, whatever you think.
I'm Japanese Italian, so I really like those two cuisines.
Japanese Italian. Oh, wow. That's an interesting combination. All right.
Yeah. And we have good cuisine. So, I mean, I love just making like a really good pasta from scratch. But then, for Japanese food, I mean, everyone loves sushi, right? So obviously I love sushi. I really love gyoza as well.
Ooh,
I make homemade gyoza, so I'll like make it from scratch.
Ooh, okay.
And that's really good.
All right. I love it. What is your favorite vacation spot? You've done a lot of traveling. You must have a favorite.
Oh, this is really tough, because it's so hard to just choose one. Okay, the favorite spot that I've went to recently was like the coast of Italy. So we did a road trip driving from Amsterdam down like through northern Italy, basically all the way to almost the southern tip. And the Amalfi Coast is really beautiful.
Oh, the Amalfi Coast?
The west side,
Yeah.
Really pretty. So I enjoyed that.
I have never been to Italy. Yeah. I have family from Sicily.
Oh, no way.
And
so we're like
my family
cousins.
went to go.
Just kidding.
Yeah. My mom's a Di Vincenti. So I got stuck with Miller, which is very boring, but Di Vincenti is a lot cooler. But anyway, my mom, I did like one of those. It's funny because I always say I'm like Italian. My wife is like, "You're not Italian. Your last name's Miller." And I did the 23andMe DNA test, and it was like 56% Italian and like
Oh, okay.
27% Southern European. I'm like, that's Italian.
That is
Thank you.
Italian.
I am Italian.
That is
I'm even
Italian.
short. I didn't get the olive complexion though. But my family's like all Sicilian and stuff. And they all went to Sicily a year or two ago.
Oh, cool.
And I didn't get to go. But yeah, they met with like my family, my cousins. We got a lot of cousins there and stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
In a little town called
You have to make it
Bissaquino
out there.
in Sicily. In Palermo. Yeah. One day. I definitely will.
Yeah.
So I love that. I need to get out to Italy one day. Or Italy is my family. They all say Italy. All right. What's your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Oh, I saw this one. That is so tough.
This one stumps every designer. Figma is life. What are you going to pick if it's not
I
Figma?
really enjoy Procreate.
Procreate. Okay. What do you like about Procreate?
Obviously, Figma is number one. Obviously, you can't cheat on Figma. Procreate is just really nice for like these days. My brain is just so caught up in like work and nonfiction books and just sometimes I feel like the older you get, the more you can kind of like lose the magic of like fiction, imagination, visualization, and just creating for the sake of creating. And so with Procreate, it's really just about doing just random sketching that doesn't need to serve a purpose. And I think we lose that the older we get.
Yeah, I agree. I still carry around like a pen and a notebook and just jot stuff down. And, I don't do like a lot of, design anymore. But I'm always like writing stuff and drawing stuff and sketching stuff, flows or random charts or something I need to like sell an idea. So I love that.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. All right.
I actually really like your answer as well. I mean, sometimes it's just nice to have like a blank,
That's it.
notebook and a pencil.
That's it. Sometimes it's all you need,
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like we just like rely on the tools too much, but like
Right.
those tools are new. Like we've been doing this for a long time. What
Right.
did
And
our
they're gonna
forefathers
change.
do when they were designing stuff? They were doing it with paper and pen and
They were
rulers,
with
damn
a
it.
feather and a quill,
Yeah, exactly. A fountain tip pen and yeah, exactly.
some ink.
All right, so that's it. Before we get out of here, Sera, tell us a little bit about where everybody can find you. Tell us a little bit about the craft. Where can we find the craft? If anybody's out there interested in learning more about that, why don't you go ahead, give yourself some plugs.
You can find us basically everywhere. So wherever you like to consume content, I would say the top places are going to be to find, either myself or the craft on LinkedIn. There we post daily. And then we also have a large YouTube channel. That's probably one of our largest channels. And then as well, we're on Instagram and TikTok. But find us wherever you like to consume content. And also, I want to say thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation,
Yeah, of
and it
course.
was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. I definitely appreciate you coming on, and your insights were fantastic. And I think our listeners are going to learn quite a lot. So I definitely appreciate that. Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Sera and me for today. I hope we helped shed a little bit of light on these various opportunities and options that you have out there, like mid-sized companies, startups, large companies, maybe running your own business. But I'm curious, have you been through any of these different types of companies? Do you have different experiences from what Sera and I had? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I would love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. If you want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there's some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. You can get a shout out on the show every week. There's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. Don't forget to head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to download Hacking Growth, How Today's Fastest Growing Companies Drive Breakout Success by Sean Ellis and Morgan Brown. Sign up for a free 30-day Audible trial, cancel at any time, and the book is yours to keep forever. And in case you forgot, I've partnered with audible.com, so anytime you sign up for a free trial, you'll help support the show. There's no obligation, and you can cancel at any time, and the audiobook is yours to keep forever. So get a free audiobook on me and help support the show. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes, along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.
magazine I read a lot called The Monocle, and they have a podcast, but I wouldn't say that's my favorite. So let me keep looking. Like the magazine is really nice, but I don't like the podcast as much, but we won't share that, right?
I'll edit that part out.